With the advent of steam propulsion had come the potential to ram an opponent in a much more regulated, controlled and repeatable fashion than had been previously. With the advent of ironclad warships, the strength of the bow was now also considered to possibly be enough that the attacker wouldn't come off just as bad, or potentially worse, than the defender. Results from ramming attempts in the American Civil War were mixed, to say the least, and whilst a large number of the early ironclads had been built with ram bows, the idea of a ship primarily dedicated to ramming had thus far not quite entered the public consciousness. But the Battle of Lissa in 1866 changed all that, and by 1867 various options were being considered in the halls of the British Admiralty. The French, seeking all possible advantages in this new era of technology, were already there with the Tauro, a small harbour defence ship, and most people were quietly ignoring the fact that the majority of ramming attempts at Lissa had either missed or had had minimal effect. Proponents of guns, of course, thought that the gun would always be able to grow and thus sink any armoured ram, whereas proponents of armour pointed out that thus far armour had managed to keep pace with guns, and in any case, as gun sizes were increasing, their rate of fire was decreasing, to a point that an armoured ram might only have to dodge or endure a single salvo before it was upon its foe, assuming that the current trends held true. And so, the start of a trend that would gradually grow to unfortunately encompass much of the Royal Navy's shipbuilding in the last third of the 19th century began to germinate in two ships. HMS Glatton, a direct reply to the US Navy's monitors, and today's subject, HMS Hotspur, which was a direct reply to Tauro and her Bellier-class descendants. Desiring a vessel that could be used on the high seas, as well as for harbour defence, the ship represented a confluence of compromises. Aside from a small breakwater bulwark right forward, she had only 8 foot of freeboard in her forward section to better present a low profile for ramming. This continued all the way back until the gun turret and superstructure were reached, whereupon it rose quite sharply to provide better seakeeping. Her main battery was another compromise. It looked like a rotating turret, but was in fact a fixed gun house, with the gun moving to various firing ports internally, which is technically a throwback to the medieval definition of turret. And it only had a single 12-inch muzzle-loading rifled gun, plus a pair of 64-pounders, one on either side aft, and that was the sum total of her original armament, apart from the ram bow, obviously. She carried iron armour across much of her hull, 8 inches thick at the ends, 11 inches thick amidships, 8 inches thick on the breastwork above the main belt, and 10 inches thick on the turret walls, with a total displacement of just over 4,000 tons that was driven through the water at just over 12.5 knots, courtesy of 3,500 indicated horsepower, delivered by reciprocating engines to a pair of screws. Once she was put into service, she turned out to have a laundry list of issues. For a ram that was supposed to catch and kill her enemies, she actually accelerated pretty slowly, wasn't especially fast once she reached her top speed, ran out of coal very quickly, and overall had about as much utility in actually pinning an enemy down as a slightly pointy brick thrown into the water. It wasn't even especially safe to fire her main gun, as the blast from its first test managed to drive the deck in front of the gun port down by several inches, and she needed to have that entire area strengthened. As a result, after less than a year of service, which also saw her involved in an unintentional collision, she was put in reserve for 4 years whilst everyone tried to work out how to make her actually useful. In 1877, it was decided she'd need effectively a complete rebuild, and so she was packed off to the Mediterranean to go and annoy the Russians and the Turks, who were having another war, whilst plans were drawn up for a rebuild. Annoyance successfully achieved, she went back into the reserves until 1881, when she was sent for her rebuild, with the plans having now been completed. In her new form, more superstructure was added, including a flying deck that extended all the way to the bow. The breastwork was replaced by side armour, in accordance with the new widened superstructure, and the gun house was replaced by an actual rotating turret carrying a pair of 12-inch guns. The turret was also fitted with compound armour protection as opposed to iron. New machinery was installed, along with torpedo cradles, a small torpedo boat, and a variety of smaller guns to replace the 64-pounders. A pair of 6-inch guns took their place directly, whilst 8 single 3-inch and 8 machine guns were scattered liberally over the upper works to deal with smaller craft. Now, at least notionally marginally useful, she re-entered active service in 1883, although only as a gunnery tender. She did this for 2 years before joining the Particular Service Squadron in 1885 for the spring and summer sailing season, before reverting back to being a guard ship at Holyhead, with occasional forays to make up the numbers in fleet exercises until 1893, when she went back into reserve again until 1897, whereupon she then spent 6 years rather optimistically styling herself as Bermuda's guard ship, before she was sold for scrap in 1904.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.